Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. For privacy reasons, the names and locations in this story have been changed. However, these are real-life confessions shared by real people. Now, let's dive into today's shocking story.
I never expected a simple DNA test to change my life. It was supposed to be a fun activity, just something to pass the time and maybe learn about my ancestry. But instead, it ripped open a secret so dark, so deeply buried, that it threatened to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. This is the story of how a simple test led me down a rabbit hole of lies, deception, and betrayal. Life before the DNA test was simple, predictable, and comfortably ordinary. I was a 28-year-old graphic designer living in a small apartment in Chicago, spending my days creating logos for startups and my nights binge-watching true crime documentaries with my best friend, Kevin. My family, my parents and my older sister, Emily, lived just a few hours away in Milwaukee. We weren't the kind of family that had big secrets or dramatic histories, or so I thought. We were the kind of family that had Sunday dinners, shared inside jokes, and argued over whose turn it was to bring dessert to Thanksgiving. My parents were loving, if a little overprotective, and Emily was my confidant, the person I called when I needed advice or just someone to laugh with. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was content. When Kevin showed me his DNA test results, I was intrigued. He'd discovered he had distant relatives in Italy, which sparked a whole new obsession with his heritage. "You should do it too," he urged, handing me the link to the testing kit. "What if you're secretly royalty or something?" I laughed it off, but the idea stuck with me. I'd always been told we were 100% Irish, but part of me wondered if there was more to the story. So, on a whim, I ordered the kit. It felt harmless, like a fun little experiment. I spit into the tube, sealed it up and sent it off, never imagining it would unravel the very fabric of my family. The unexpected results. The weeks after sending off the DNA test were a mix of excitement and forgetfulness. At first, I checked my email obsessively, refreshing my inbox every few hours, eager to see what the results would reveal. But as the days turned into weeks, life got in the way. Work deadlines piled up, my social calendar filled with weekend plans, and the test slipped to the back of my mind. Every now and then, Kevin would ask, "Hey, did you get your results yet?" And I'd shrug, saying, "Not yet, but soon." It became a running joke between us, something to laugh about over drinks or during our weekly trivia night. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, the email finally arrived. I was sitting at my desk, sipping coffee and scrolling through my inbox, when I saw it. "Your DNA results are ready." My heart skipped a beat. I clicked the link, my fingers trembling slightly, and waited for the page to load. The first screen showed a colourful map of Europe, with percentages assigned to different regions. Irish, 62%. English, 25%. Scandinavian, 8%. I smiled. It was close enough to what I'd always been told, mostly Irish, with a little something extra. I felt a flicker of pride, like I'd just unlocked a piece of myself I hadn't fully understood before. But then I scrolled down to the next section. DNA matches. At the top of the list was a name I didn't recognize. Nathan Carter. Next to his name was a label that made my stomach drop. Close family. Brother. I stared at the screen, my coffee forgotten, my breath catching in my throat. Brother. That couldn't be right. I had one sibling, Emily. We'd grown up together, shared a childhood, fought over the TV remote, and laughed over inside jokes. If I had a brother, I would know. Wouldn't I? I refreshed the page, my heart pounding, hoping it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the system had glitched. Maybe brother was a technical term for a distant cousin. But the label didn't change, and the percentage of shared DNA was undeniable. 50%. Full siblings share about 50% of their DNA. There was no way around it. Nathan Carter was my brother. My mind raced. Who was he? How had I never heard of him? Why had my parents never mentioned him? I clicked on his profile, my hands shaking. He was 30 years old, 2 years older than me, and lived just a few states away in Indiana. His profile picture showed a man with dark hair and a warm smile, but it was his eyes that caught me off guard. They were my eyes, the same shape, the same shade of hazel. And his nose? It was my mother's nose. The resemblance was uncanny, like looking at a distorted reflection of myself. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just a curiosity anymore. This was real. I had a brother, a full-blooded brother, and no one had ever told me. My mind spun with questions, but one thought kept rising to the surface. What else don't I know about my family? Shock and denial. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of disbelief. This had to be a mistake. Maybe the lab mixed up the samples. Maybe Nathan Carter was some distant cousin, and the system had mislabeled him as a brother. I Googled frantically, searching for explanations. Can DNA tests be wrong? How accurate are sibling matches? The answers were clear. While mistakes could happen, a 50% match was definitive. Siblings. Full siblings. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Nathan was adopted, and my parents had taken him in briefly before giving him up. But why wouldn't they have told me? And why would he still be labelled as a full brother? The math didn't add up. My thoughts spiraled. Was I adopted? No, that couldn't be it. I looked too much like my parents, especially my mother. The resemblance was undeniable. So what was the truth? I felt a knot tighten in my chest. My hands were clammy, my breath shallow. I couldn't focus on work. I kept refreshing Nathan's profile, hoping for some clue, some explanation. But there was nothing. Just his name, his age, and the word brother staring back at me like an accusation. I called Emily, my voice trembling as I explained what I'd found. There's no way, she said immediately. It's got to be a mistake. Her certainty calmed me, but only for a moment. Deep down, I knew the truth was more complicated. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my thoughts consumed by questions I couldn't answer. Who was Nathan? Why had he been kept a secret? And what did this mean for my family, for me? By the time I got home that night, I was exhausted, but sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The life I thought I knew felt like a fragile illusion, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face what lay beneath it. The confrontation. The drive to my parents' house felt like the longest 2 hours of my life. My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't bring myself to call ahead. I needed to see their faces when I asked. I needed to know the truth. When I pulled into the driveway, my mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner. The familiar scent of garlic and onions filled the air, a comforting reminder of countless family meals. My father was in the living room, reading the newspaper, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but I knew that by the end of the night, nothing would ever feel normal again. I walked in, my laptop tucked under my arm, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. My mother looked up, her face lighting up with a smile. "Hey, sweetheart. What a nice surprise. Are you staying for dinner?" I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. "Yeah, maybe. But first I need to ask you something. Both of you." My voice wavered, and my father lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone cautious. I set the laptop on the kitchen table and opened it to the DNA results. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. "I took one of those DNA tests," I began, my voice trembling. "You know, just for fun. But something came up, something I don't understand." My mother wiped her hands on a dish towel and leaned over to look at the screen. Her smile faded as she saw Nathan's name and the word brother next to it. The colour drained from her face, and she took a step back, clutching the edge of the counter for support. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why does it say he's my brother?" My father stood up, his newspaper falling to the floor. He walked over slowly, his expression unreadable. When he saw the screen, he froze. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was suffocating, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, my father sighed and pulled out a chair, gesturing for me to sit. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with regret. My mother sank into a chair across from me, her hands trembling. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We never wanted you to find out this way." The room felt like it was spinning. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. "Find out what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What are you not telling me?" My father reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine, as if he wanted to comfort me but didn't know how. "Your mother. She had a baby before we were married," he said slowly, each word weighed down by decades of secrecy. "She was young, and her parents, they didn't think she could raise him, so they made her give him up for adoption." I stared at them, my mind reeling. "You're saying I have a brother, a full brother, and you never told me?" My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We thought it was for the best. We wanted to protect you, both of you. But now, I see how wrong that was." The weight of their words crashed over me like a wave. I felt anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness all at once. "How could you keep this from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How could you let me find out like this?" My father looked down, his shoulders slumped. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said quietly. "But now I see we were just running from the truth." The room fell silent again, the air thick with emotion. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. All I knew was that my family, the one I thought I knew, wasn't what I believed it to be. And now, I had to figure out what to do next. The Secret Unveiled. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath, her eyes distant, as if she were stepping back into a past she had tried so hard to forget. "I was 18, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just out of high school. Your father and I had been dating, but we weren't serious yet. I was young, naive, and I made a mistake." She paused, her gaze dropping to the table. "I got pregnant. I was terrified. My parents were strict, traditional. They believed in appearances, in keeping up a certain image in the community. When I told them, they were furious. They said I had ruined my life, that I had brought shame to the family. They gave me an ultimatum. Give the baby up for adoption or leave, and never come back." My father reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression pained. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Not until years later. She didn't tell me because she thought I'd walk away. And maybe I would have. I was young and stupid, and I didn't know how to handle something like that." My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to give him up. I wanted to keep him, to raise him. But I had no money, no job, no support. My parents said they wouldn't help me, and I believed them. So I did what they told me to do. I gave him up." The room was silent, except for the sound of her quiet sobs. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what I was hearing. My mother, strong, loving, the woman who had always been my rock, had been forced to make an impossible choice, and she had carried that pain with her for decades. "After the adoption," she continued, "my parents acted like it had never happened. They never mentioned it, never asked how I was feeling. It was like this huge, dark secret that we all pretended didn't exist. And eventually, I started to believe it too. I buried it so deep that I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. My father sighed, his voice heavy with regret. When we got back together a few years later, she told me everything. I was shocked, but I loved her. I wanted to be there for her. We decided to move on, to build a life together. But we also decided to keep it a secret. We thought it was the best thing for everyone, for you, for Emily, even for Nathan. We didn't want to disrupt his life or ours. I stared at them, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. But you never thought about how it would feel for me to find out like this? I asked, my voice trembling. To discover I have a brother I never knew about. My mother reached for my hand, her touch tentative. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting you, but now I see how wrong that was. I should have told you. I should have trusted you. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers to the questions swirling in my mind. But another part of me ached for her, for the young girl she had been, forced to make an impossible choice. My father cleared his throat, his voice soft but steady. We made a mistake, he said. We thought we were doing the right thing, but we were wrong. And now, we have to face the consequences of that. We owe it to you, and to Nathan, to make this right. I sat there, my mind racing. The family I thought I knew, the one built on love and trust, felt like a fragile facade, hiding decades of pain and secrecy. But as I looked at my parents, their faces etched with guilt and regret, I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. And now, we had to figure out how to move forward, tracking down my brother. After the confrontation with my parents, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. I could either walk away, try to forget what I'd learned, or I could reach out to Nathan and uncover the truth for myself. The decision wasn't easy. Part of me was terrified. What if he didn't want anything to do with me? What if this opened up more pain than I was ready to handle? But another part of me couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity, the need to know the brother I never knew I had. I sat at my desk staring at Nathan's profile on the DNA testing app. His face looked so familiar yet so foreign. I typed out a message, deleted it, and typed it again. Finally, I settled on something simple. Hi Nathan, I just got my DNA results and it says we're siblings. I had no idea you existed until today. Can we talk? I hit send before I could second guess myself. My heart raced as I waited for a response. What if he didn't reply? What if he thought I was some kind of scammer? But within minutes my phone buzzed. His response was short but filled with emotion. I've been waiting for this moment my whole life. Relief washed over me, followed by a surge of nervous energy. We started messaging back and forth, slowly at first, testing the waters. He told me he'd always known he was adopted but had never been able to find his birth family. He'd taken the DNA test on a whim, hoping for answers, but never expecting to find a sibling. As we talked, I felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement, fear, and a deep, aching sadness for the years we'd lost. After a few days of messaging, Nathan suggested we meet in person. I think we both need to see each other, he wrote, to make this real. I agreed, my stomach churning with nerves. We picked a diner halfway between our cities, a neutral place where we could talk without pressure. As the day approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change forever. The meeting. The diner was a small, cozy place tucked off the highway, the kind of spot that felt frozen in time with its checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and the faint smell of coffee and bacon lingering in the air. I arrived early, my hands trembling as I slid into a booth near the window. I ordered a coffee I didn't plan to drink, and stared out at the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. Every time the door opened, I glanced up, half expecting to see him, half dreading it. When Nathan finally walked in, I knew it was him immediately. He had the same hazel eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, the same nose as our mother. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then he smiled, a warm, tentative smile, and walked over. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm Nathan." My voice cracking. It felt surreal to say those words out loud. He slid into the booth across from me, and for a moment we just sat there, taking each other in. The resemblance was uncanny, like looking at a distorted reflection of myself. The conversation started awkwardly, as most first meetings do. We talked about the weather, the drive, the diner's menu. But soon, the small talk gave way to something deeper. He told me about his life, his adoptive parents, who had been kind and loving, but always honest about his origins, his job as a high school history teacher, his love of hiking and photography. I told him about my life too, my work, my friends, our parents. It was strange, sharing pieces of myself with someone who felt like both a stranger and a part of me. As we talked, I noticed little things, the way he laughed, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. It was like seeing fragments of myself in someone else, and it was both comforting and unsettling. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of his adoptive parents. "They've been amazing," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "But I've always wondered about my birth family. About you." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. "I didn't even know you existed," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not until a few weeks ago." He nodded, his expression understanding but tinged with sadness. "I figured. But I'm glad you reached out. I've spent my whole life wondering who I was, where I came from. And now, here you are." The moment hung in the air, heavy with emotion. I reached across the table, and he took my hand, his grip firm but gentle. In that moment, something shifted. The awkwardness faded, replaced by a sense of connection, of belonging. We weren't just strangers sharing a booth in a diner. We were siblings, bound by blood and a shared history we were only beginning to uncover. By the time we left the diner hours later, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the parking lot. We hugged goodbye, promising to stay in touch, to figure out what this new relationship meant for both of us. As I drove home, my mind raced with thoughts of the future. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many questions, so much to process, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had found my brother, and somehow I knew that everything was going to be okay. The aftermath. Integrating Nathan into the family wasn't easy. There were awkward dinners, hesitant conversations, and moments of tension as we all navigated this new reality. My parents were nervous, especially my mother, who carried the weight of guilt for keeping Nathan a secret. But Nathan was patient, understanding, and determined to build a relationship with all of us. The first time Nathan came to our house for dinner, the air was thick with unspoken emotions. My mother fussed over the meal, her hands shaking as she set the table. My father was quiet, his usual jovial demeanour replaced by a sombre seriousness. Emily, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but even her efforts couldn't completely dispel the tension. When Nathan arrived, he brought a bottle of wine and a warm smile. He hugged my mother, who burst into tears, and shook my father's hand. "It's good to finally meet you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Over dinner, we talked about his life, his adoptive parents, and his hopes for the future. It was strange, sitting there with this man who was both a stranger and a part of us, but it also felt right. Over time, the awkwardness faded. Nathan started coming to family gatherings, and slowly, he became a part of our lives. There were challenges, of course. Old wounds resurfaced, and there were moments of anger and sadness as we all grappled with the years we'd lost. But there was also healing. My mother in particular seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I never thought I'd get to see him again," she confessed to me one night. "It's like a second chance." For me, having Nathan in my life felt like finding a missing piece of myself. We texted regularly, met for coffee, and even took a road trip together to explore our shared love of history. It wasn't perfect. We were still learning how to be siblings, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, our family felt complete. Outro. Looking back, this journey has been one of the most profound experiences of my life. What started as a simple curiosity, a DNA test ordered on a whim, unraveled a secret that reshaped my understanding of family, identity, and love. It wasn't easy. There were moments of shock, anger, and heartbreak. But there was also healing, connection, and a newfound sense of belonging. I've learned that families are complicated. They're made up of stories, some told, some hidden, and those stories shape who we are. My parents' decision to keep Nathan a secret was born out of fear and shame, but it also taught me the importance of honesty and the power of forgiveness. Nathan's presence in my life has been a gift, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and effort. If there's one thing I've taken away from this experience, it's that our past doesn't define us, but it does connect us. I've learned to embrace the messiness of my family's history, to see it not as a source of shame, but as a testament to resilience and love. And I've learned that it's never too late to rewrite the story, to build bridges where there were once walls. So, what about you? Have you ever wondered about the secrets your family might be keeping? Have you considered taking a DNA test or digging into your family history? It's not always easy. Sometimes the truth can be painful, but it can also be incredibly rewarding. You might discover stories that inspire you, connections that change you, or even a piece of yourself you never knew was missing. Life is full of surprises, and sometimes the most unexpected ones can lead to the greatest gifts. For me, that gift was Nathan, a brother I never knew I had, but who has become an irreplaceable part of my life. And while our story isn't perfect, it's ours, and that's enough. Thank you for joining me on this journey.
If you enjoyed this insane story, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more shocking confessions. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.